Okay, so what we're going to be doing here is covering some ways, different things that you can do when using Google Sheets. All right. So the very first thing we're going to do is talk about increasing the cell size in a Google Sheet. So this would be a cell. And you know a cell is highlighted because it will be surrounded by a blue line on the top, bottom, left, and right sides. This cell is currently selected. Increasing the size of cells is fairly simple. If you want to increase the height, you bring your mouse over to the horizontal line that divides the two rows, in this case rows 5 and 6. The divider would turn into a thin blue horizontal line, which you can see. And what you may not see in this video is the cursor would also show a little arrow pointing up. Once that arrow and the blue line are shown, you simply click, left click, and drag downward. And just like that, just sight, your cell height has been increased. Now, this is about the same size as these, maybe a little larger, but I want to illustrate this properly, so I'm going to drag it even further down. All right, so now that you can see this cell size, its height is about 3 times that of the other content that was already here. All right, and all of this content that was here for the purposes of this illustration was used to illustrate how to do other things in Google Sheets. You can visit the channel and check the list of videos, and you'll find a series of how to use Google Sheets videos. They'll show you how we created this chart, how we created this drop down, how we created the auto sum functionality here, and a few more other things. And just check that out by visiting the channel and looking at the videos that are there already. Okay, so the thing about increasing the size of a cell in Google Sheets that you want to keep in mind is the height of each cell can be independent of other cells, as we've just demonstrated here. However, the width of each cell has a direct impact on the width of all of the other cells in a particular column. What I mean by that is if you come up to the top of the sheet in the name of item column, and as you can see, we had to scroll all the way back up in order to see what the actual name of the column was that was in the header row. In the header row is a row. When you hear people say header row, they're referring to the first row that contains the information that usually describes the information that's in the column beneath it. Some people might call that metadata. All right, so for example, name of item, date. There's date information in the cells located beneath the date, and with amount, you have amounts, obviously. Okay. The thing is, when we get ready to, and we'll touch on this later in the video, on how to prevent us from having to scroll up and down the page to know what the header information actually is. The thing to keep in mind here is that when we've increased the height of the cell, but now we want to increase the width of the cell. Well, instructions are pretty much the same. You find the vertical divider between columns A and B in this case, and you'll notice that the divider itself will turn into a thin blue line. And what you may not be able to see in this video is there's an arrow, black arrow that's pointing to the right. You basically click and drag, and you drag this out as far as you like the size of your cell to go, and then you let it go. Now look at how much bigger our image size, our cell size actually is. What you may have noticed is that unlike when we increase the height of the cell, when we increase the width of the cell, it had an impact on all of the other cells' width. So everything in this column now is carrying this same width. Okay, and that is just the nature of how increasing the size of a cell at a basic level works in Google Sheets. So I'm going to come up to the upper left hand corner. I'm going to click the undo button a few times just to get us back to where we were. And the cell size, as you can see now, is back to what it was when we started this video. My chart, however, got moved a little bit, so we're going to move this back over, and that happened basically because when we altered the size of the entire spreadsheet, Google Sheets tried to automatically adjust place the chart where it thought it made the most sense. So we had to move that back. So that's essentially how you size a cell in Google Sheets. Now what we want to talk about next is what I was pointing out before, where in scrolling down a page hides your header information from you. And we don't want that to happen. The way to keep that from happening is simple. You simply highlight the row itself, you right click, you come all the way to the bottom and look for view more row actions, and that opens up a second contextual menu. Freeze up to row 1 is what you want to select. Freeze up to row 1. And once you click that, left click that, you'll notice something. The horizontal line that was separating row 1 from row 2 across the entire spreadsheet is now light gray, but it's much thicker than it was before. That is an indication that the row itself is now frozen. So now I'm going to scroll down the page, and if you notice, the first row is not moving at all. It's still visible. I'm going to go past all of the content on the page, and you'll notice the first row is still visible. It's not moved at all. This is extremely helpful when you have large amounts of content in a spreadsheet and you're 30, 40 rows down, and you may have forgotten what the purpose of the actual column was. In this case, we're only dealing with text, dates, and amounts. So it's fairly simple and straightforward. However, in a more complex spreadsheet or a larger spreadsheet, you may have several rows that contain dates, or several rows that contain amounts, or several rows that contain text. And scrolling down that page, it would be near impossible for you to remember what every single column represented. This keeps you from having to scroll back up the page. Right, so we're going to come up to the upper left hand corner and click undo. I'm undoing these things. You may not necessarily want to undo these things. I'm undoing them for demonstration purposes only. But if it's something that you really needed to have in place, obviously you wouldn't undo it, you keep it. So the next thing we're going to do is say, hey, just like we were able to freeze a row, how about, let's say I wanted to freeze a column. Is that possible? Well, the answer would be yes. So let's make this practical, and let's look at, I have total here, right? And let's say I had, 20 or 30 rows of these numbers, and I'd have to scroll all the way over here to see those numbers. Well, again, in a smaller basic spreadsheet like this, not that big of a deal. But if I had, let's say, a grand total and a subtotal and another row in here that maybe was subtracting for taxes, and maybe another row in here that was applying a discount, well, that would get, a lot more complicated. And I would not want to necessarily have to scroll all the way back over to the left hand side of the spreadsheet just to see what the data was. So we're going to freeze this column by right clicking or left clicking on it, the letter A in this case, which highlights the entire column. You want to right click and look for view more column actions, and then come over to freeze up to column A. Freeze up to column A. And if you'll notice, the effects are pretty much the same, except this time we have a vertical row that separates column A from column B that has now become a little bit thicker. And guess what that means? When I scroll over to the right, that column doesn't budge. So now if I'm having to scroll over several columns and looking at different information, I know that this particular row represents the column. Okay, so that said, we're going to undo this, and we're going to now insert a URL. And URLs are fairly easy to insert. Google Sheets has made it extremely easy. You literally type out the name of the website with the extension. Okay, and that's key, and I'll show you why. We're going to say quikStarts.com, hit enter, and that's it. This is now a clickable URL. When I highlight it, I get a pop-up that shows me a thumbnail of the actual website, which I can then click. Google Sheets will open up a new tab for me automatically. It will contain the actual website. Right, we'll close that out. There's other things that you can do too here as well. There's a copy option where if I were to click that, and let's say come down here or go to another cell and right click and click paste, that URL appears. So undo that, highlight the cell again. This is cell D1. Also in the thumbnail, you'll find an edit button, a pencil icon, which is an edit button. You click on that, opens up another form for you where you can change the domain name. Okay, you click the apply button after your changes are made. Let's click out of that box so that we can bring the pop-up up again. And this last one is remove link. Now this one's interesting. Once you click on remove link, it basically allows you to keep the name of the domain in the cell, but it's no longer functions or is recognized as a URL, meaning highlighting it does nothing special. It's highlighted, and highlighting it, when you highlight it, Google Sheets simply reacts as if it would with any other cell, right? It's treated as simple text. If you want to convert it back to a domain, another URL, actually, you want the domain to be clickable as a URL, you highlight the cell itself and come over to the toolbar and look for insert link and click on that. And I'm going to select this. I could type it in here, but I'm going to select this because Google remembers that I previously had a URL, and this being it. So I'll click on that, and just like that, you inserted a URL into Google Sheets. I'm going to undo this and show you one more important thing here, which is when you are typing this out, you want to make sure you're using legitimate extensions. An extension would be a .com, .net, .org, .io, etc., etc. There are a lot of extensions available now for domain names. I'm going to try to create one that I don't think any one is using. Like, again, there's so many of these now that this could very well be a extension that's recognized by the World Wide Web. However, if Google Sheets doesn't recognize it, then it doesn't matter. So I'm going to hit enter. And mousing over this now, I'm getting the same results as I was before, right? It's being treated like text because Google does not, Google Sheets does not acknowledge that .zzz is a valid extension. I'm going to change this back to .com. simply by clicking in the cell, erasing the ZZZ and replacing it with .com, and hit enter. And again, because that .com is there and because that is a valid extension, Google Sheets automatically converts this into a URL for us. And that's it. If you found this helpful, like the video. If you want to see more content around Google Sheets, or you had any questions about this particular video, just leave it in the comments. We will respond there. We'll even make another video if necessary. In fact, if you ask for another video to be created on a different topic in Google Sheets or any other software program, just leave your request in the comments. If you like what you saw here and you want to see more, subscribe to the channel and click the bell button so you'll be notified when we go live in the future.